Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Shaniqua Levin, and I am the convener for Long Island United to Transform Policing and Community Safety. I thank you for being here today. This has been a long process. We've been working for 8 months to put together our plan that really reimagines what policing and community safety can look like on Long Island. Over hundreds of people came together to work on work groups, to flush out different proposals around so many different points when it comes to policing. We all worked individually on our coalitions to come up with different ways to reimagine policing. And then we came together to create one document called the People's Plan. Long Island United to Transform Policing and Community Safety is joined by Long Island Advocates for Police Accountability and United for Justice and Policing. Today, we will have speaking to you Frederick Brewington, who is from Long Island Advocates for Policing and Community Policing and Accountability, and Terrell Dozier from Long Island United to Transform Policing and Community Safety, and Deborah Little from United for Justice and Policing. For months and months, years and years, shall I say, Black people have been dealt with violence at the hands of police officers. Many will say that it doesn't happen on Long Island, but in our plan, we show you cases and cases of times that it does happen on Long Island. And regardless, it's happening in our country. Bias is real. Police officers are sometimes aware of their bias, and sometimes they are just racist, unfortunately. And therefore, we are dealt with differently because of our skin color. When it comes to traffic stops, we're stopped more and arrested more. When it comes to so many different things, Black communities are constantly over and hyper policed by police. What we want to do is lessen the encounters that we have with policing. We want to look at how do we do policing differently. This is an old system. It came from a slave catcher system that's no longer relevant today. We need to make a system that is for all of the people. So that's what we have done. We have taken the time to really look at how do we make a system that serves all of our people while maintaining public safety. And our People's Plan really it's 310 pages. It touches on so many different proposals on how we can do things differently. It's so unique on Long Island to have so many organizations collaborate and come together. People responded to the George Floyd killing, to Black people being disproportionately affected by COVID, to the Breonna Taylor killing, and said enough is enough. When do Black people and brown people get treated the same and are receiving justice? So they decided to take to the streets this summer and really stand up and rise up against a system that has been oppressing Black and brown people for centuries. And they decided, outside of just taking to the streets, let's come together and create real reforms. We knew that, the governor had put an order out, Executive Order 203, and it demanded that municipalities actually create real reform, right? That they come out and reimagine what policing should be responsible for and restructure it. We knew that we couldn't fully count on our police to actually police themselves. Although we joined coalitions and that the counties had put out and task force that the counties have put out, with the understanding that we would be part of the process to create actual reforms together, we realized that that wasn't true, that they were creating plans, for instance, behind our backs, or that the plans that they were creating weren't really filled with structural changes, just more of what they're already doing or things that they should be doing, but not addressing the way policing should actually be changed to meet 2021's needs. So we're happy that we were able to still maintain our presence in our coalitions to keep moving forward and writing proposals on how to do policing differently. That is what we're here for today, to share with you our hard labor, to share with you our collaborative process. We, again, had so many groups and so many people actually join us and write this write this plan together so that way Long Island can actually be just for all. So I'm now going to turn it over to Terrell Dozier, who's going to talk about a few pieces of the plan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Shaniqua, and thank you all for being here. As Shaniqua mentioned, my name is Terrell Dozier. I am a member of Long Island United to Transform Policing and Community Safety, which is a coalition of approximately um, uh, nearly 40 organizations. I am also a member of Long Island Network for Change, which is one of the supporting organizations of that coalition. Um, as Shaniqua mentioned, we brought together dozens of people to help research and write this plan. Additional key contributors are Gender Equality New York, who supported the writing a key section, Long Island Language Advocates Coalition, which also wrote a key section, and New York Social Action, which also supported in writing a key section. I am going to go through the first few sections of the plan. Overall, altogether, there are 12 sections of the plan that comprise that comprise 20 proposals. Each of the proposals are focusing on structural systemic reforms that will change the infrastructure of public safety on Long Island. This plan is not about condoning or disparaging individual police officers. This plan is about making all Long Islanders safe, feel safe, being safe in their communities. The first section is transforming crisis response. As we know, individuals with mental illness, behavioral health problems, and housing insecurity, and particularly individuals who are also people of color, are overrepresented in the criminal system, and there are often deadly encounters with law enforcement. According to the 2017 Bureau of Justice Statistics report, 37% of prisoners and 44% of jail inmates have been diagnosed with a mental disorder. The entangling of behavioral health problems and law enforcement make it difficult for people with mental health issues, substance abuse problems, and challenges related to poverty, which we know is a root cause of criminalized behavior, to get adequate treatment and support, and places a large burden on our criminal justice system. At the end of the day, we want help, not handcuffs. We want public health issues to be treated with a public health response, not criminalization. So our proposal is to create a new crisis response model for Long Island that reforms 911 responses to ensure that call takers can adequately and holistically assess callers in crisis. This creates a behavioral health co-responder teams composed of clinical professionals, trained peer specialists, and unarmed crisis responders, and establish a tiered response system to match the level and type of risk posed. And this includes the collection and reporting of comprehensive data on these calls and responses. In section 2 of our plan, we have transforming traffic enforcement. We know that traffic enforcement is the place where most police have interactions with community members. More than 20 million Americans are stopped each year for traffic violations. And often, this is also a place where police bias comes out. The degree of bias that is inflicted upon Black and Hispanic communities during traffic stops are well documented and well researched. This detrimental impact of bias spans the spectrum of financial hardship to the unfortunate and unnecessary loss of life. At the societal level, public safety and trust in law enforcement is eroded by outdated policing practices, such as pretextual stops. And we have evidence of this bias, deep evidence in the traffic enforcement in Suffolk County, which, due to the Department of Justice settlement agreement, has collected and reported on it data and practices. And we have preliminary evidence from Nassau County, which is not under the DOJ settlement agreement and therefore has yet to update their data collection practices. Nevertheless, our proposal is to eliminate disparity in traffic stops on Long Island by transforming the policies regarding police traffic enforcement. And this means exploring options for alternative unarmed traffic officers and collecting, publishing, and analyzing comprehensive data on traffic enforcement in alignment with the STAT Act. This also means ending pretextual stops and warrantless searches during traffic stops. And we have detailed examples of many other cities within our plan that have done this kind of work. And finally, I will talk to you about Section 3, which is transforming police accountability. Nassau County and Suffolk County are among the largest police forces in the country, and yet they operate with very little oversight, data reporting requirements, or accountability measures to ensure public trust. Their investigation and complaint processes are conducted internally, and they are not subjected to stringent questioning by their respective county legislators, nor are there mechanisms available for public scrutiny of their operations, policy, and or training regime. As such, it is important to institute a system and an infrastructure of oversight and accountability. And this is exactly what this section entails to do. So we want to build an infrastructure of accountability that includes developing a civilian complaint review board. This means creating a board that will fairly and transparently resolve allegations of police misconduct and in a manner in which both the public and the police department may have confidence. The CCRB must be well funded, it must be independent, and it must have strong investigative authority, the ability to collect and publish data in a fully transparent manner, and have the power to direct the police commissioner to impose discipline. Secondly, we would like to create an office of the Police Inspector General. This office must be well funded, independent, and have the authority to audit, inspect, and evaluate and investigate the activities, records, policies, and data collected by the police department. They must receive copies of all complaints and communications with complainants and to track and monitor systems of complaints and investigation. We want all police officers to implement the STAT Act. The police departments must collect comprehensive data on all facets of police and civilian interaction, publish the raw comprehensive data on their website, and hire independent vendors from local institutions of higher education to analyze the data, prepare written reports, and inform the public and county legislators. This includes data on traffic, as previously mentioned, but also data on pedestrian and bicycle stops, on 911 calls, use of force, complaints, police in schools, hate crimes, and language access. We would like the development, greater oversight of the Public Safety Committee. The Public Safety Committee must be charged with more active and engaged oversight of police departments. Best practices include requiring data collection, reporting of raw data to the public, and engaging in independent analysis of that data. In addition, the Public Safety Committee should hold public hearings whereby the police commissioner is required to sit, provide data publicly, and answer questions from members of the PSC and public about policing practices and policies. We would like to remove complaints and investigations from police departments and create a CCB and an Inspector General's office. But until those are in place, we must ensure that all complaints are handled by the internal affairs units and not precincts, that they share complaints with the Public Safety Committee, and that they publish comprehensive data about complaints, investigations, and outcomes on the police department websites. We also have a proposal for liability insurance. This would mandate personal liability insurance for all officers and make it a contingency of employment. Departments should cover the average premium costs, provide reimbursement to officers whose premiums are below the average costs, and collect reimbursement from officers whose records lead to higher premiums. We would like the two counties to pass the Right to Know Act, which is the ID law and consent to search law in both counties. Officers must provide their name, rank, command, date, and reason for the stop at the beginning of all encounters with civilians. They must ask if interpretation is needed and then provide it, and document all stops that do not end in arrest. In addition, warrantless searches should not happen without signed informed consent. Uh, we also proposed implementation of community surveys. The police department should prioritize community surveys, ensuring that all relevant communities are surveyed on a regular basis, and that an impartial local institution of higher education is hired to develop, administer, and analyze the survey. These community surveys must measure how satisfied people are with how they are being treated by police and how police have handled their issue, civilian judgments about procedural justice, and people's experience with language assistance. And finally, to round out our section on police accountability, we want to transform the practices related to use of force. Police departments must adopt best practices, language, and training to bring use of force policies in line with nationally proven standards. This means requiring police officers to exhaust all alternatives before resorting to use of force firearms, require comprehensive use of force data reporting, creating and requiring a use of force continuum that restricts the most severe types of use of force to extreme situations, and creating clear policy restrictions for each weapon and tactic, as well as require warnings prior to the use of firearms. I will now turn it over to Deborah to discuss the next sections articulated within the proposal.
Thank you, Terrell and Shaniqua. As Shaniqua said, my name is Deborah Little. I'm a member of the North Brookhaven Sanctuary Cluster, which is a member organization of United for Justice and Policing on Long Island. I'm going to begin by discussing hate crimes. The problem, of course, is that hate crimes have a serious effect not only on victims, but on the entire community. And while law enforcement has the duty to identify, report, and prevent hate crimes to protect residents, this is not sufficiently done in either county. The proposal is to transform the enforcement of hate crimes, non-designated hate crimes, and incidents as follows. Codify existing and or non-existing policies mentioned in the plan into legislation, and Long Island Police Department should fully implement. This includes the following. The police must properly identify and report hate crimes and incidents. They must map and track hate crimes, non-designated hate offenses and incidents to see the trends, prevent future events, and provide an accurate picture of hate offenses in the county. They need to communicate with the public to protect and warn communities, support victims, their families, and the entire community, and develop rehabilitation and prevention programs with government, nonprofits, and faith communities. The next proposal is to transform the treatment and safety of transgender, non-binary, and intersex people. The gender expansive community refers to many types of people, including transgender, gender nonconforming, and non-binary, and intersex people. In a national transgender survey, more than half of respondents said that they were either somewhat or very uncomfortable asking the police for help, and more than half of those reported that when they interacted with police or law enforcement officers, they endured some form of mistreatment, including being misgendered, verbally harassed, or physically or sexually assaulted. There's an urgent need to create safe and affirming relationships between the gender expansive Long Island community and law enforcement officers. The proposal is to develop a policy that provides safe and respectful treatment for transgender, gender non-binary, and intersex people in a manner appropriate to the person's gender identity and or expression. In short, develop and implement policies that ensure that gender expansive community members receive the same treatment as cisgendered persons. There's explicit detail about how to do this in the plan. Section 6 has to do with school resource officers and or police officers embedded in schools on a regular basis. The problem is that police are not accountable to nor supervised by school authorities. Nevertheless, punitive school discipline practices often push vulnerable students out of school and into the criminal justice system. In schools with school resource officer programs or other law enforcement presence, harsh school discipline practices have become intertwined with the criminal legal system, and vulnerable students have been arrested and some deported. The proposal: eliminate the school resource officer program in Suffolk County and other programs in Nassau that place police officers in schools, redeploy funds spent on school resource officers to build transformative justice programs that avoid the criminal justice system and increase social emotional learning programs in schools, and provide other supports that improve student behavior by meeting students' needs. Finally, language access. The failure to fully provide language access places lives in danger, particularly when an individual needs help during a crime, a medical emergency, a disaster, a domestic violence incident, or some other crisis. Police are often the first to respond to these situations. In situations involving law enforcement, communication barriers, compounded by racial, ethnic, and class biases, may result in unjust criminal consequences for immigrants and even deportation and family separation. When language access is not fully and correctly provided, communities of color suffer the consequences. The proposal is to develop and implement a comprehensive language access plan that ensures accessibility to non-English speaking community members and provides transparent data regarding the use of bilingual resources. Shaniqua, is Fred here?
Yes, Fred is here.
Yay, I'm turning this over to Fred.
First of all, good afternoon to everyone. I've had some serious technical difficulties, but we're going to overcome those right now. Let me first turn my attention to the concept of building authentic trust and legitimacy between the police department and communities, and particularly communities of color, where mistrust has been pervasive and long-lasting, particularly with regard to the issues of over-policing in certain communities. We address that within the plan and start at about page 258 and dealing with how we can then better work through building authentic trust and legitimacy within the communities, improving the community council systems that exist within, particularly in Nassau, but also in Suffolk, and evaluating and implementing crime prevention programs that give control to communities, rather than just try to say, we're going to do a sports program for kids, which is not a bad idea, but they are much more appropriate and more community-based involvement that can take place, which leads us to the next issue, which is technology and social media. We discussed that within the People's Plan, and in discussing that, we talk about the underutilization of the current available social media to address some real issues that exist within the communities. One, police accountability. How do the police get feedback on a regular basis from the community, and how does the community know what's going on with regard to its police force if there are no regular reports being made or ability to have access to give input almost immediately? This does bleed into the use of social media and other mediums that go along with what's been proposed in the Civilian Complaint Review Board section. But the question of using social media to discuss what is taking place, particularly in the light of the death of George Floyd and what's been happening in the counties of Suffolk and Nassau, raise some serious issues. We also talk about the underutilization of evaluating data which is supported, which supports that shows, for instance, that the rate of arrests in Nassau County, for instance, are for African Americans is 5.3 to every one white person that is arrested. That information was known to Nassau, but not disclosed, not made clear, and statistically was not done and never put out from a social media standpoint. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is because there is no transparency, and what we do is we suggest ways to build that in, to utilize social media and technology better to build and to be more transparent and accountable. We then go on to hiring and training, and education. Part of that, and that's a very meaty area, and it's to implement a set of policies and practices that ensure diversity and accountability within hiring and promote comprehensive training that focuses on the needs of communities in the 21st century. Well, we know that the total number of police officers that are in both Suffolk and Nassau County with regard to the percentages of persons of color is completely out of kilter. How does that change? Well, not only with regard to recruitment, but also with regard to public relations that are built there and deal with hiring policies and practices that maintain accountability and public trust. Right now, there is no responsibility, nor is there regular reporting unless there's a real request that's being asked. January 2016, 91% of Nassau County Police Department's sworn personnel were men, and 82% were white. Conversely, 37% of Nassau County residents are people of color. That is just completely out of kilter. We point to that and also give some suggestions with regard to changing hiring and promotion policies, such as all new hires and promotions are roughly proportionate to demographic diversities of the county in which they are being sought, and also having discussions about that. We talk about how people should be trained. Innovative hubs should be set up to deal with the issues relating to how people are trained with regard to field training and other types of training, including within the curricula of the police department and at its training facilities, that they include information that is going to talk about what some of the realities are historically with regard to race, with regard to the advent and creation of police forces, and how essentially telling the story, how important it is to understand that policing started in the United States in many quarters as a way of keeping track and or keeping down folks that were at that time slaves or coming out of slavery. There's slave patrols in the South, and that's discussed also in this report. One of the things that we found with regard to the Nassau County document that they purported to be a report was that he did not really discuss the racial components, the disparities, nor the inequities which exist within its own police department and its interactions with the community. Education we're talking about also does include talking about how do we correct and train police officers for being police officers in the 21st century, not back in the 19th or 20th century, as many of the processes are still in place that were in place well back then. We do talk about the information about drugs and how to evaluate that, particularly putting focus on not over-policing in certain communities while under-policing in largely white communities, but still putting large dollar amounts into the opioid crisis, which 85% largely affected the white communities. There are a lot more with regard to hiring and training, but the last point that I'm going to talk about is officer wellness. We talk about that in the People's Plan as a way of dealing with two particular issues. One, public safety, but also the good outcomes for police officers. We know that police officers go through traumatic situations, and as a result of that, they usually have one psychological evaluation at the time that they come into the force, and then there is no regular requirement for any type of psychological support, help, or reporting that they are required to engage in. As a result of that, we are suggesting that there be regular check-ins with regard to psychological support, that they have regular support and check-ins after traumatic instances, and that there be a 2 or 3 year full evaluation that be done on officers, particularly in situations where they've been doing patrol or other very difficult jobs where they may not be the same person that they are that they were when they came onto the force 3 years later. This seems to make sense. It also allows to be early alerting of officers that are in need, so that they're not suffering and their families are not suffering, because many of the officers are engaged in things that may very well happen on the job and take it home, or things that are happening at home and come onto the job and then balloon into bigger problems. Those are some of the components that I'm going to speak about and that we've spoken about in the People's Plan, and would urge you to take a look at it. This is not a document that is filled with fluff. This is not a document which seeks to try and talk about what we're doing now, as opposed to what we're doing now in the light of what we should be doing now, and how we can make things better for all the communities that are served in Nassau and Suffolk County.
And finally, rounding out the People's Plan is Section 12, which is Continued Reinvention and Equity and Safety Task Force. We know that institutions have a difficult time reforming themselves and innovating with the practices within themselves. Continued monitoring, feedback, and review of reforms to policing protocols, practices, and infrastructure is required. And if Nassau and Suffolk counties and their respective leaders are serious about enduring and impactful reform, then they must acknowledge the work to enable true and equitable community safety. And this does not end when the governor mandated police reform plan is submitted on April 1st. We want to take a holistic view of public safety. This isn't just a myopic look at policing and police reform in and of itself, but seeing how we can leverage all infrastructure and many institutions to create a safer Long Island. And therefore, we propose the development of a permanent county-based equity and safety task force to be created through and codified within law. It must use an equity-informed continuous reinvention framework to assess the impact of safety reforms and recommend reforms to be initiatives to be developed. This means reform and reinvention mandated by Governor Cuomo's executive order is always ongoing. And some of the responsibilities of this task force would be to review data on key safety indicators, to solicit community feedback and dialogue, to identify best practices in a holistic and on holistic safety and innovation, and to recommend new initiatives and assess impact.
Thank you. And just to summarize a few things, this summer, many new voices joined in the fight against police brutality by taking to the streets to show their support for Black lives and to demand that the current state of policing change. The governor heard our call and created Executive Order 203, which requires local governments to work with the public to address racial bias and disproportionate policing of communities of color. In an unprecedented manner, numerous organizations, community leaders, individuals came together to collectively, came together to collectively address the ways that policing can be more equitable and community oriented. To construct the People's Plan, we invited the public to join our work groups and discuss some of our recommendations with lawmakers to determine what barriers we may face. Now that the protests have died down, we need everyone to call our lawmakers to share the proposals from the People's Plan. We need everyone to spread the word, because we need a system that doesn't protect racist and biased police officers. It's time to change the system, because it was never meant to make all of us safe. The current state of policing doesn't prevent crime, but merely provides a response to crime. We do not need more officers in communities. We need programs that uplift our people, promote quality, and help promote equity, and help people break generational cycles, because we've only been out of segregation for 53 years. When American colonizers needed a workforce, they used blacks as slaves. When that became illegal, the war on drugs was their next tool, and then mass incarceration. When white people began to experience the opioid crisis, they weren't met with a war, but were met with programs designed to help them. Now is the time to stand up for Black people and correct the wrongs of America's history. It's time that we change the system. Many systems in our country have changed through the years, and policing shouldn't be exempt. Nationwide systemic racism has built inequitable policies and discriminatory practices and the very foundation of our criminal justice institutions. Across the country, we have filled prisons with Black and brown people and expanded policing and incarceration while defunding the very systems and programs that would address the root causes of crime. Long Island has an infamous history of racial segregation and hyper-policing of Black and Latinx communities. For too long, our communities of color have been the victim of these practices while we fail to repair the harm caused by those left behind. Much of the work police do is merely engaging in the daily harassment of Black communities for minor crimes or crimes of poverty that shouldn't be criminalized in the first place. Out of the 10.3 million arrests made per year nationally, only 5% are for serious offenses, including murder, rape, and aggravated assault that threaten public safety. The remaining 95% of arrests are for incidents such as traffic violations, marijuana possession, unlawful assembly, and even lesser indiscretions. These statistics evidence that police agencies are spending the overwhelming majority of resources on minor incidents that do not actually threaten everyday life, but in fact lead to mass criminalization and incarceration of Black Americans. On a day-to-day basis, Black people worry about their Black sons, their Black husbands, their Black brothers, their Black nephews, their Black cousins, their Black grandchildren. They worry about everybody Black because every time they encounter police officers, they feel that their Black skin that they were born into will make some police officers scared of them and cause them to be beaten or killed. Black people are your neighbors, your colleagues, your staff, your employers, your friends, and most importantly, we are people. We need you to value their lives, show up for Black people, and take action because we are under attack. Racism is a pandemic that has been plaguing Black people for centuries. In order to enact change, we came up with a people's plan and put in lots of time and effort into working on reforms. The police are responsible for too much, and they're not equipped to deal with this broad range of issues. Police are also tasked to find criminals and look for them in the neighborhoods they know nothing about. We need people that are actually trained in dealing with mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness. We need a better system, not more armed police officers to deal with public safety. The policing system should be designed to work for the people, and the people should have a say in what tasks the police are accountable and responsible for. Together, let's promote transforming public safety by using restorative justice and alternatives that stop the cycle of violence. If we don't change things, our kids' and their kids will have to march in the streets, create hashtags, and call out even more names to be remembered because someone is scared and doesn't value Black skin. Are you willing to be part of another generation that remains complicit with the way Black lives are being treated when it comes to law enforcement? Black people should feel the same safety and security that white people feel, but as it stands right now, they don't. Let's be the generation that makes an impact. Let's be the change. Let's change the fact that Black parents have to have the talk with their kids and explain that they must do certain things in order to remain alive during simple encounters with the police. Let's all take it in our hands to make sure that we step up and support and endorse and make sure that the People's Plan becomes a reality for all Long Islanders. And if those that say it doesn't happen on Long Island, in the People Plan, it cites many cases where it has happened on Long Island. Long Island is one of the most segregated places in our country. So best believe it does happen here. We would love to hear your questions and be able to answer them for you. So you can either use the raise your hand icon if you have a question, or put your question in chat, and then we will get to it for you.
Hi, Shaniqua. I have a question if no one else wants to go first.
Go ahead.
I'm curious about how you see the prognosis of a number of the items in the People's Plan making it into the final approved plan by the legislatures. Specifically, what you see as your legislative mechanisms. We sort of know that Nassau has dismissed a number of these. We don't yet know about Suffolk, and so specifically, what can you and your allies do to get some of these more philosophically distinct things from your plan into the official approved plan?
Who would like to take that question? Terrell, if you're talking, you're muted. Okay, go ahead, Deb. Sorry.
So I'll start, and then Terrell and Fred should certainly jump in. First of all, I think none of us accept that the Nassau plan is a done deal yet. All of these people and groups are working hard to ask the Nassau County Legislature to make the People's Plan the plan that is adopted on April 1st. Secondly, none of us thinks that these measures would happen overnight. A plan can say within 6 months, we will codify, or 1 year or 2 years, we will codify and create a CCRB and an inspector general. And in the interim, police departments will be charged with handling complaints through a real internal affairs process like we outline in the plan. So I don't actually think, I wouldn't call anything in the plan philosophical. These are very practical suggestions based on research, both social science research and policing research, with lots of models and examples of legislation and programs that have been and are being adopted around the country already.
Yes, I would just like to reiterate and say that in Nassau, the legislature said that they would be waiting for the People's Plan in order to review it and marry components of the People's Plan, or take the People's Plan as a whole, as it relates to the official plan that will be sent to the governor. And so I think we expect, and I think the community, the Nassau County community, expects the legislators to uphold what they said and actually put substantive, structural, systemic reforms into the plan that is being sent to the governor. And Suffolk, they have not released a plan yet. And so in Suffolk County, we expect that the task force, which has been tasked with writing that actual plan, to review the People's Plan and to build the People's Plan into the plan that Suffolk County will be sent to the governor as well. And I would like to reiterate what Deb said, which is that one of I think the biggest excuses, and I am using the word excuses intentionally, is that, well, we don't have the budget to implement this plan. And I think that's a place where we utilize the current pandemic as rationale for why key reforms cannot be made. And nowhere in Executive Order 203 does it mention a timeline for implementation of what is written in the plan. So I think all community members understand that that budgets are currently tight across the counties, and that some things may take longer than other things to actually implement. Some items in the People's Plan they can implement tomorrow, and it costs no money to do so. And so those are the things that can be pushed ahead. And there are other items that might need to be piloted and reviewed and data assessed and et cetera. And we all understand that. But the thought that this plan that was submitted that's going to be submitted to the governor is just simply going to be a compliance exercise needs to be rethought, and actual structural reforms need to be embedded in it. And that's what the People's Plan is made up of.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
Where can we find a copy of the whole plan, all 300 some odd pages? Where are we going to see that?
You can find it on our Facebook pages, and I'll put all the links in the chat, and all of our websites, LongIslandUnited.org and LAFBA.org as well. But I will add those links in the chat so everyone can have it. And when we're done with the press conference, we will also send it out via email.
Thank you.
Good to hear you, Joy.
It's all good in the hood. Let me ask you something else.
Sure.
A lot of these proposals, and it's interesting because a lot of them have in fact been adopted by other jurisdictions. But if you take a look at Nassau, since that's the one that's furthest along in the pipeline, as it were, some of what you're looking for example, a civilian review board, for example, a board that would make recommendations on discipline. These are tied into processes that are governed by a union contract. How do you see dealing with this, having this considered as, on the one hand, it's going through the legislative tract, and on the other hand, the county executive is sitting back down to negotiate with police unions. Now, have you talked to the police unions? Was there police union involvement in this? How do you get around that?
Fred, would you
Sure.
like to answer this one?
Sure. And Joy, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Fred. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. I just caught the last part of your question. So if you can just give me a little framework one more time, I will respond to it.
And I'm trying not to have you all hear me cough. What I said, just summarizing, in Nassau is the furthest along. It's in the legislature. So there'll be debate before the legislature decides what, if anything, to do with this plan and the one that the police department's been there. At the same time, we know that the county executive is beginning negotiations again with the largest union, the PBA. Some of the proposals you have in here deal with disciplines, deal with things that are part and parcel of processes that are enshrined in union contracts. How are you going to push those things forward? Have you had any conversations with the unions? Do you think that there's a way to get this, to get your plan done?
Well, that's a great question, as usual, from you, Joy. The answer to the question is that's exactly why we raised this question early on when the SOA contract was going through. And when they tried to push through the PBA contract, lo and behold, the PBA said no, because they don't want to necessarily have to deal with some of the terms that were part of that contract, even though they were getting paid extra to wear body cameras and other issues. The way that we see that this going through is that the timing is perfect. We think that it's necessary for these discussions to take place and for things to be on the table. If the unions themselves don't want to be responsive to the needs of the people, that needs to be made known to the community as well as part of what's going on in terms of reform. If you remember, the Executive Order 203 made it clear that this was not a option, it was a mandate, and that the changes that need to take place are ones that may very well require a lot of discussion, but that doesn't mean that we don't put the time in, whether or not it's with the police department, the commissioner, or the unions. Unfortunately, in this entire process, unlike Suffolk, Nassau did not bring the union people to the table as part of this discussion. So by doing things backwards, we're going to have to do a lot more work, but that doesn't mean it can't be done.
Just to clarify, so when Nassau did its initial structure for this, I could have sworn I saw that there was some union involvement there. Am I wrong?
You are wrong.
It happens.
You are wrong. And just so you know, I chaired the CCT, and there was no union representative, no discussions about union. As a matter of fact, they wanted to avoid contract discussion, and we're not trying to avoid the Taylor law or try to deal with that, but they wanted to avoid any of those questions that were tough, whether or not it was dealing with race, whether or not it was dealing with money, or whether or not it was dealing with how we were going to address the fact that you had a police force that was in a lot of ways more than an occupying force in communities of color. And as a result of that, those discussions did not take place. And we find ourselves at a point where you're asking this question, which is totally relevant, but unfortunately needs to be addressed and can't be dealt with as though you got a blindfold on.
Fred, this is Charles Lane. I wanted to try to re-ask my question again. Do you see any specific amendments or legislation that can be put into the Nassau County Legislature that might get some of your recommendations into the final approved plan?
I did not see anything. You're talking about in the renewed documents that they put out?
No. So as I understand it, like the legislature is going to consider the plan that was posted the other night. And what I'm curious is there actually a legislative mechanism to get your proposals into their plan? Like what actually is going to?
Well, actually, today, every legislator is getting it from us this afternoon. The second thing is we have been invited to present to the Public Safety Committee in Nassau County on the 24th at 3 o'clock. Please put that on your calendars. February 24th at 3 o'clock, we have been told that the three major groups here, LIU and GJP and LIFPA, are being asked to present to the legislature the People's Plan. We will be there. We will present, and we encourage the press to come because this is an opportunity for the community to be heard. So that's how we get it in front of the legislature. A letter has gone to Legislator Ford and Mr. Nicolello asking not only that we present to the Public Safety Committee, but that we also be able to present fully to the full legislature prior to their April 1st deadline, which is set right now. We have ample time. We've got the rest of February and of course March, but in that time we can use it wisely, and we plan to be prepared to present on the 24th of February as well as during the month of March.
And just to reiterate, like we said before, in Suffolk, they have access to see our proposals. That way they can include them into their report to the legislature. And on Friday, we will be presenting the full plan to the Suffolk County Task Force. And we've already presented it to some members of the task force, but we'll be presenting it to the full body on Friday.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Hi.
Your internet is not allowing you to be clear. Would you mind putting your question in the chat because it's not coming through clear?
Okay. Oh, it's not coming through.
Oh, now we hear you. We want to give it a try again?
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I wanted to ask you, how does the People's Plan address the village police?
Can I answer that?
Sure.
Sure. This is Fred Burlington. Who asked the question, please?
It's Emmy Funderburg. How are you, Mr. Burlington?
Hey, how are you? How are you? It addresses the village police in the form that every one of the aspects of the People's Plan, both for Suffolk and Nassau, are informative and helpful for the village police, the town police, and the city polices that exist on Long Island. We did concentrate on the big police departments, that being Suffolk and Nassau first, but we also have, for instance, in the Civilian Complaint Review Board section, there's an opt-in aspect to that legislation. And answering one of the previous questions, that is an actual piece of legislation that is ready to be picked up and run with by the legislators. But with regard to the village police, we have been helpful and supportive to those advocates that are working with the village, the smaller police departments. But each and every aspect of this is being sent to all of the village police departments and the mayors and their village trustees, so that they have this as both a resource and they can use it as a template, because a lot of the information that is there is consistent with what should take place in the villages as well as in the counties.
All right. And I just have one other question. You know, often for Black males, and it's, I do.
Emmy, you cut out again.
I lost you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, for some reason my internet is just, maybe because of the snow. I just wanted to ask, for those who can't obtain a college degree, how would they then go about being a police officer if that's something they're interested in doing?
You want me to handle that? Hello?
Yeah, Fred, that
Yeah.
seems to fall under the hiring, so.
Sure. So with regard to the suggestion of trying to increase the educational levels is one that is encouraging to communities throughout. We know that the educational attainment levels of the communities of color have been consistently underserved by the educational institutions in the state. We are looking at this both as from a holistic standpoint, but also a reparative standpoint, that there needs to be some repair there. There's also opportunities, and we have been in contact with groups such as the Guardians and other organizations that will seek to try and allow avenues available to underserved communities in the police department that will allow them to have both special dispensation with regard to some of the educational issues, but also encouraging them to meet standards that will help them improve as persons.
Thank you. I see Candace has a question. Candace, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for this primer and for the plan. I have a couple of questions. I had covered the last public safety hearing in which the commissioner testified and said many times that a lot of the reforms, they believe that a lot of the reforms had already been incorporated, and that the governor's executive order was designed not necessarily for the Nassau County Police Department, but for other police departments in the state where that are perhaps not as high level or professional. I'd like to get your response to that because they did say that several times.
Sure. If I may take
And then
this.
I have a second part to that question.
Sure. So the order was put out there for all police departments. And I don't know why, Nassau feels, or the illusion is that Nassau feels exempt from it, or they feel like they are doing the best job. But it was to take a look at policing as it stands and reimagine the way policing should be. Should all of these responsibilities be on the police officers? Is there a different way to go about handling some of these roles and responsibilities? So no, Nassau County is not exempt, and no, they are not doing all that they can do to really see policing differently and make sure that the bias that is there does not harm Black and brown people. So they should really be taking a look at the structural changes that's needed to be made, not just making their new building a space for community events. Or putting more police on bicycles in our communities. Hiring practices, they're going to add mentors, that's great, but your system is already broken. So you're bringing people into a system that's broken, where people, those that they call good cops, can actually even be good cops because they'll be disciplined for being so. So Nassau County is not exempt and needs to take a look, a real hard look, on how we can do things differently, not just add-on fluff.
Let
Can
me
I-
just can I just address the rest of that, if you don't mind, because I think Shaniqua hit the major point. And here's one of the things that we know, in all due respect to the commissioner, he spoke with blinders on. He spoke not realizing that we had already done the evaluation of arrests in Nassau County, where we saw such a disparity. It bears statement that you can't just run away from the fact that in Nassau County, according to the police department's own numbers, there is a disproportionate rate of arrest of Black people to white people. 5.3 Black people for every one white person. And that doesn't make any sense when the population of Nassau County is completely flipped around on the other side. It doesn't make any sense that you say that it doesn't apply to us, when indeed you look at your rank and file and you see that a disproportionate number of white individuals who are being policed, who are being hired as police, and African Americans and Latinos are such a small percentage. We are not in the 50s and 60s anymore. And you just can't simply say it. One of the things the governor said is that police agencies had a responsibility to take a look at their plans and consider evidence-based policing strategies. We looked at the evidence, Suffolk and Nassau County, but in Nassau County, they've attempted to basically put their head into the sand, and we know when you stick your head into the sand, there's only one thing sticking up. And that's the result of what we are dealing with right now. We're trying to address the realities, not play games with words, but get down to the nitty gritty so we can start to make the changes that need to happen. And that's really where we are right now. Nassau can say things, but the reality is that the facts point to something quite different.
Deb, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add to that real quickly. So, because sometimes we hear that in Suffolk as well, though not as probably deeply as it comes out from the Nassau commissioner. But of course, the proof is in the evidence, as Fred said. And we know from Suffolk County that despite the fact that they have been implementing new anti-bias training and procedures, their own data on traffic stops show continued profound and deep disparities, racial disparities. NASA has no idea what's going on in the field because they refuse to collect and publish that data. So you can't just say you've done it because they have no idea.
Right, and they've now said they're going to collect that data, but it's actually 3 or 4 years after they were told and asked to do so by our sisters and brothers at the ACLU. The reality is they chose not to do it, and they got embarrassed. They got embarrassed into the fact that they were not doing it, and then claimed that it was as a result of suggestions that were made by us. The reality was that they were avoiding it as much as they could because their numbers, and this is a prediction, their numbers will likely be much worse than Suffolk County's.
May I quickly respond to the question too? Because I think it's an important one. Nassau County likes to claim the U.S. News #1 safest county in the United States. Okay, they got #1. They were in the bottom. They are amongst the bottom as it related to equity. You know, we know that poverty and crime are connected. And Emily Kaufman threw into the chat the guide, and I will share. She's sharing quickly the guide that the governor put out that accompanied Executive Order 203. And in that first question, it asks communities to say, what role should police perform? What are the functions of police and what role should they perform? Nassau County, this guide does not exclude Nassau County. Nassau County, like every other locality in New York State, should be having the conversation about what the responsibilities are of their police departments, what are the functions of their police departments. And when you look at the data that they have provide, and Fred has done an analysis of this to say that Black community members are 5.3 times more likely to be arrested than white community members in Nassau County. When you look at drug arrests, and if any research that you see across the country say white community members and Black community members use and sell drugs relatively at similar rates, and yet Black community members, at Nassau's own data, that is not that comprehensive, but their own data shows that Black community members are 2 to 3 times more likely to be arrested due to drugs than white community members. So the question has to beg, if all of this research is saying that people are utilizing at similar rates, why are Black community members being arrested so disproportionately? Unfortunately, Nassau needs to look themselves in the mirror and understand that just because they got a #1 rating in US News and Safety does not mean that they are in tip-top shape as it comes to policing, particularly around their communities of color.
I know, Candace, you had another question, you said?
It was just the second part to
Okay.
the question. And you talked a lot about how the legislators are going to get copies of this, and you'll present next Wednesday. And many of you spoke at the last Public Safety Committee hearing in Nassau. I'm just wondering, should not enough of your points be incorporated into the document that's due to the state on April 1st? What are you doing then? Are you sending your own plan directly to the state?
The answer to the question is that in addition to making this to the making our plan, the people's plan, to being given to the public today, because it's out there, and also then having listening sessions and input sessions for the next 4 weeks. We are also sending a copy of this to the Attorney General's office and to the Governor's office. So that then I will tell you that the Governor's office has been kept involved and informed, both in writing and in discussions about what's been going on in Nassau and Suffolk County, and particular Nassau County. So with regard to that, the answer is yes, it will be going to the legislators in the state, that being the heads of the Senate and the Assembly, because we've been writing to them as well as the governor. And the other thing is that if you really want to get our view of what Nassau presented, starting on page 7 of the People's Plan, is the People's Critique of Nassau County's Police Reform Document. They don't even call it a plan initially. They initially call it police reform, which it is not. But we encourage you to look there, because every one of those pages gives you a snippet of our evaluation of what the county says they are doing, and if indeed it is reform.
We will also, if we don't expect everything to get in right away, but we'll do what we have to, as the people always do. Activism tactics are real, and activism tactics cause change, and that's what we have to rely back on. We will take part in that as well.
Thank you so much.
I know Mike O'Keefe had a question. Mike, do you want to mute yourself and ask your question?
If he's not jumping in, I'll ask it for him, because I see it in the chat. And
Okay.
Michael, jump in if you need to. Michael, you there? All right, let me ask. It says, he writes, in terms of technology, what role will body cameras play in the People's Plan?
The People's Plan, maybe Terrell wants to talk about this as well, but the People's Plan does encourage body cameras, and we think that the body cameras are a current form of technology that should be used without question. And for police to resist it and claim that they should be paid extra monies to put on a body camera when we might as well just be asked to ask them to pay for us to pay them to put on their bulletproof vest. It's another part of their equipment. And as a result of that, we are supportive of body cameras, but not just for the purpose of just wearing them, but for them to be utilized both as information for instruction and for with regard to safety of both police and with regard to citizens. So the body cameras are relevant and also are an important tool that are discussed within the People's Plan.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that and say that we are, like Fred mentioned, 100% in favor of body cameras. Not necessarily are we in favor of police being paid additional funds to wear body cameras, which should be considered part of their uniform. We do not pay police in order to use their uniforms. Why would we pay police in order to utilize body cameras, particularly when body cameras are not just utilized in order to protect community members, which in and of itself would be rationale enough to ensure police utilize body cameras, but body cameras, as we know, are also leveraged in order to protect police from false accusations and claims. So they should be wanting to wear body cameras. But also, we also want to recognize that body cameras are not in and of themselves full systemic or structural reforms. And so to simply say, well, we're adding body cameras to our plan and then think that the community is going to be happy without actually making any substantive reforms to discipline or the structures or the roles or the function of police is not doing anybody a favor. And we know in many circumstances across the country that body cameras have been leveraged, have been utilized, people have been seen misconduct by police, and at the end of the day, police still end up getting off. So we do not think that body cameras are somehow the panacea that are just going to solve police misconduct.
Right, and Michael, they are one aspect of a holistic view of how policing needs to come into conformity with the needs of the community.
And I just want to add to that to say that having a body cam, if you continue pretextual policing, for example, or sending out police officers to every mental health call, that's a reform that isn't really accomplishing anything in terms of public safety and ending bias.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions? Okay. So what we will do is we will send you out. Wait, is that another question coming in? Okay. We will send you out our names, the correct spellings, and our affiliations, and the contact information as well, by email within the hour. Hopefully sooner than that. But feel free to reach out to us. We will also, I believe, be hosting another press conference on Monday, and a lot of you will have had the time to read it entirety this weekend, have something to read and ingest it, and come back with additional questions. We thank everyone for being here today, and we encourage you to please spread the word about the People's Plan. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Bye-bye now.